reality, etc. In our culture, there seems to be very little communication between science and religion. And yet, the practitioners of both disciplines claim that their studies are fundamental to an understanding of basic truth. What emerges from the UFO communications is the attitude that there is a single valid approach to the complete understanding of the universe, and that this approach blends what we presently consider to be two separate disciplines and philosophies. My personal bias, at least during the initial stages of my investigation, was wholly on the side of scientific disciplines. As the investigation continued, however, I kept finding what seemed to be a religious or spiritual factor in the contact phenomena. My determined bias towards open-minded and impartial observation led me finally to acknowledge this factor as a genuine part of UFOlogy. At present, I no longer regard this factor as separate from a scientific understanding of the phenomena. The seemingly religious content of the communications is seen as such because of our own cultural conditioning. We interpret these meanings as religious. It is my belief that the foundation of a much more nearly absolute and true philosophy of natural phenomena is being made available through the UFO contacts. At present, our languages are inadequate to communicate anything but the first step in the evolution of our thinking. It will be necessary for us to make this first step in order to begin to understand how to make the second. Paranormal phenomena. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to converse with some ghosts that materialized into our physical world and then vanished after our conversation. To many physical researchers, this phenomenon, known as materialization due to ectoplasmic emission from a medium, is an established and accepted occurrence. It is my belief that anyone following the rules and conditions laid down for this type of contact can achieve it, assuming that he or she is in the presence of a suitable materialization medium, an individual capable of producing ectoplasmic emissions. The most evidential of the ghosts which I saw and talked to was a tall, ghostly individual who grew solid before my eyes, carried on a conversation with me, and then, to prove his ability to manifest in the physical world, slapped me and my companion, Carla, solidly on the arms. Then he slowly walked through us while we watched closely. This in the space of a few seconds. He displayed both the properties of a perfectly solid substance and those of a totally absent of solidity. Psychic researchers have for many years reported and photographed these ghostly materializations, but because of their inability to produce the phenomena at the demand of skeptical observers, little general interest has been developed in this research. As we unravel more of the UFO mystery, we will discover the reason why the skeptical or prove it to me approach is quite often the defeating factor in paranormal investigations. I also noticed the same factor in evidence as I recently observed several hundred seemingly miraculous, barehanded surgical operations in the Philippines. I saw native psychic surgeons seemingly plunging their hands directly into the patients. I saw native psychic surgeons seemingly pulling their hands directly into the patient's unanesthetized bodies, pulling out all sorts of bloody parts while their patients remain perfectly conscious, watching the process and feeling no pain. The patients displayed no wounds or scars after the operation was completed. Here again, the evidential quality of the operation witnessed was very dependent upon the attitude of the witness. It has been aptly stated that with paranormal phenomena, believing is seeing. There are many observers who attend demonstrations of paranormal phenomena and who conclude that what they have seen was all trickery. I've had a lot of experiences in witnessing these demonstrations, have seen several hundred authentic ghosts materialized, have watched much psychic surgery, and had minor operations performed on myself. And in every case, I have noted a common factor. If skeptical observers were present, the phenomena either did not occur at all, or their quality was so poor that trickery would naturally be suspected. Now, the skeptical observer doesn't like this facet of the phenomena at all and uses it as evidence of the fakery. His or her problem is that he or she doesn't understand why he or she, as a skeptic, can't be given evidential and inalienable proof of the reality of the phenomena. He or she absolutely cannot accept the necessity under the circumstances of their skepticism of taking the word of some believer, who he or she usually considers deluded. The reason that this lack of proof must accompany skepticism will become evident as we further explore the UFO communications. My own stance is a balanced one, I hope. That of the believer who is skeptical of tricksters among the real practitioners. There are many fraudulent mediums and many quack psychic surgeons. I have seen both practicing their trades and am aware of their methods. Yet their existence does nothing to compromise the reality of the paranormal phenomena generated by the real mediums and psychic surgeons. A pertinent question when considering psychic demonstrations is, how does the paranormal event happen? The answer may well lie in the area of occult theory, which is concerned with the existence of various planes. The Theosophists say that there are 14 mental planes associated with this planet. After death, they say, an individual finds him or herself at one of these 14 levels of existence, the level being dependent on the spiritual nature or development of the person at the time of their death. The cliche that covers this theory is a heavenly bird of a feather flock together. When a ghost materializes into our reality, it is from one of these 14 levels that he or she usually comes for their earthly visit. In general, it is theorized that a planet is a sort of spiritual distillery, with reincarnation taking place into the physical world until the individual is sufficiently developed in the spiritual sense that she or he can reach the higher states of existence and is no longer in need of this planet's developmental lessons. Most of this theory was developed as a result of reported contact and communication with the inhabitants of these supposedly separate realities. The most satisfactory term I have come across for these different levels of reality is the word density. I have come to believe that these densities interpenetrate with our physical space and mutually coexist, though with very little awareness of each other. A simple analogy is to consider the actors in two different TV plays, both receivable on the same set, but each play being exclusive of the other. This seems to be what we experience in our daily lives, one channel or density of existence being totally unaware of the myriad entities occupying other densities of our physical space. Many of the UFO reports display ample evidence that the object sighted has its origin in one of these other realities or densities, just as do the materialized ghost. I would like to emphasize that this does not in any way imply their unreality, rather it displaces the UFO's reality from ours. I'm saying the equivalent of Channel 4 on the TV is equivalent to, but displaced from Channel 3 on the same TV. The point of all this is that our density or reality is not ultimate or singular. It is in fact our reality only at the present. If you were told to build a scale model of any atom using something the size of a pea for its nucleus, it would be necessary to have an area the size of a football stadium to contain even the innermost orbital electrons. If the pea were placed at the center of the 50-yard line, a small cotton ball on the uppermost seat in the stands could represent an electron of the atom. There is very little actual matter in physical matter. When you look at the stars in the night sky, you probably see something quite similar to what you would see if you could stand on the nucleus of any atom of a solid material and look outward towards our environment. To demonstrate an electron to you, a physicist will probably show you a curved trace of one on a photographic plate. What he probably does not tell you is that this is second-hand evidence. The electron itself has never been seen. Only its effect on a dense medium can be recorded. It is possible, of course, to make accurate mathematical calculations about what we call electron. For such work, we must know some data on magnetic field strength, electron charge, and velocity. But since a magnetic field is caused by moving charges, which in turn are empirically observed phenomena, we find that the entire mathematical camouflage obscures the fact that all we really know is that charged particles have effects on each other. We still don't know what charged particles are, or why they create an action at a distance effect. Senior scientists would be the first to agree that there is no such thing as an absolute scientific explanation of anything. Science is rather a method or tool of prediction, relating one or more observations to each other. In physics, this is usually done through the language of mathematics. Our scientific learning is a learning by observation and analysis of this observation. In the sense of penetrating the fundamental essences of things, we really do not understand anything at all. A magnetic field is nothing but a mathematical method of expressing the relative motion between electrical fields. Electrical fields are complex mathematical interpretations of a totally empirical observation stated as Coulomb's law. In other words, our forest of scientific knowledge and explanations is made up of trees about which we understand nothing except their effect, their existence. Baba Ram Das, formerly Dr. Richard Alpert of the Department of Psychology at Harvard University, met Sai Baba in India and was given a small medallion by that guru. Sai Baba held out his hand. A glow appeared in his palm, and the glow slowly solidified into the medallion. Dr. Alpert was amazed and commented to one of Sai Baba's associates on this miracle of creation. "Oh, don't be silly. He didn't create that," replied the devotee. "He has a whole warehouse full of those things. He just transported it here mentally." Sai Baba's own attitude towards this sort of thing is that all is illusion or maya. This would seem to be a very accurate analysis of our physical world, which is most often apparent to mystics and atomic physicists. For an example of the mystical approach to our illusion, here is Awasapi, explaining about all the heavenly bodies which we cannot see because they are outside of our illusion. "When a planet hath attained to so great age, she no longer giveth forth light, or heat to radiate upon herself. She cannot be seen in the heavens. Of which kinds of planets there are millions in the Etherean firmament. Some of these move slower than any of the planets man can see. Some of these at times eclipse the sun and are taken for sunspots, although perhaps not a million miles from the earth." To a person unfamiliar with the inner workings of modern science, it may seem that modern man has his environment nicely under control and totally figured out. Nothing could be farther from the truth. The leaders of science who are researching the frontiers of modern theory argue among themselves, with their followers dissenting in droves behind them. As soon as a theory begins to receive wide acceptance as being a valid representation of physical laws, someone finds a discrepancy, and the theory has to be either modified or abandoned entirely. Perhaps the most well-known example of this is Newton's F equals m times a. This attained the status of a physical law before being found to be in error. It is not that this equation has not proven extremely useful. We have used it to design everything from a moon rocket to the television picture tube. But its accuracy fails when applied to atomic particle accelerations like the cyclotron. To make accurate predictions of particle trajectories, it is necessary to make the relativistic corrections formulated by Einstein. It is interesting to note that the reason for this correction is based on the fact that the speed of light is totally, independent of the speed of its source. If Newton had penetrated more deeply into the laws of motion, he might have made this relativistic correction himself, and then stated that the velocity correction would always be of no consequence, since the velocity of light was so much greater than any speed attainable by man. This was very true in Newton's day, but is definitely not the case now. We still tend to think of the velocity of light as a fantastic and unattainable speed, but with the advent of spaceflight, a new order of velocities has arrived. We have to change our thinking from our normal terrestrial concepts of velocities. Instead of thinking of the speed of light in terms of miles per second, think of it in terms of Earth diameters per second. The almost unimaginable 186,000 miles per second becomes an entirely unthinkable 23 Earth diameters per second. Or we could think of the speed of light in terms of our solar system's diameter and say that light would speed at about 2 diameters per day. Einstein's assertion that everything is relative is so apt that it has become a cliché of our culture. Let us continue being relativistic in considering the size of natural phenomena by considering the size of our galaxy. If you look up at the sky on a clear night, nearly all of the visible stars are in our galaxy. Each of these stars is a sun like our own. A calculation of the ratio of the number of suns in our galaxy to the number of people on planet Earth discovers that there are 31 suns for each living person on Earth today. Earth's population is close to 8 billion, and there are 250 billion stars in the Milky Way. It takes light over 4 years to get from Earth to even the nearest of these stars. To reach the most distant star in our own galaxy would take light 100,000 years. These calculations are made using the assumption that light has a speed. This may be an erroneous assumption in the light of modern theory, but its apparent speed is a useful measuring tool, so we use it anyway. So we have a creation in which we find ourselves, which is so big that at a speed of 23 Earth diameters a second, we must travel 100,000 years to cross our immediate backyard. That is a big backyard, and it would seem ample for even the most ambitious of celestial architects. But in truth, this entire system of 250 billion stars is just one grain of sand on a very big beach. There are uncounted trillions of galaxies like ours, each with its own 250 billion stars, respectively, spread throughout what seems to be infinite space. When you think of the mind-boggling expansion of our creation and the infantile state of our knowledge in relation to it, you begin to see the necessity for considering the strong possibility that our present scientific approach to investigating these expanses is as primitive as the dugout canoe is in relation to the whole state of the art of earthbound transport. The most perplexing problem of science has always been finding a satisfactory explanation of what is called action at a distance. In other words, everyone knows that if you drop something, it will fall, but no one knows precisely why. Many people know that electrical charges push or pull on each other even if separated in a vacuum. But again, no one knows why. Although the phenomena are quite different, the equations which describe the force of interaction are quite similar. For gravitation, F equals G times M divided by R squared. For electrostatic interactions, F equals K times Q divided by R squared. The attractive force between orbiting electrons and the atomic nucleus is described by the electrostatic interaction equation. Now, each of these equations was determined experimentally. They are not apparently related in any way, and yet they both describe a situation in which attractive force falls off with the square of the distance of separation. A mathematical representation of an action at a distance effect is called a field, such as a gravitational or electric field. It was Albert Einstein's foremost hope to find a single relation which would express the effect of both electric and gravitational phenomena. In fact, a theory which would unify the whole of physics, a unified field theory. Einstein believed that this was a creation of total order and that all physical phenomena were evolved from a single source. Over the years, Einstein and other mathematical physicists published many unified field theories, none of them successful. A famous one, put forth by Carla, recast the mathematics of relativity in a space of 5 dimensions instead of the customary 4. Carla hoped that unification of gravitation and electromagnetism would follow by a subtle interpretation of the 5th dimension. Einstein took up Carla's work, but once more no new physical understanding appeared. The most celebrated unified field theory, called the generalized theory of gravitation, was published by Einstein in 1945, and independently by Schrödinger at about the same time. But then Schrödinger was delusioned by quantum mechanics, which he himself had helped to create. For some years, both these eminent men believed that the new theory would solve the problems which they thought still beset fundamental physics. The mathematics of the theory is very complicated, and it is necessary to use approximate methods. With these, it was shown that the theory failed to satisfy the basic requirements that its field equations must determine the motion of electric charges present. This was enough to convince Schrödinger that the theory was useless. Einstein was not prepared to accept the approximate results. He maintained that the theory could be judged only if certain exact solutions of the generalized field equations were found. These exact solutions, he believed, would represent matter by pure field. This was the position he took up until his death. This unified field theory describing matter as pure field has been accomplished now. It seems that the entire situation was analogous to the solution of a ponderously complex Chinese puzzle. If you can find the right key turns among so many wrong ones, the puzzle easily falls apart. Dewey B. Larson found the solution to this problem, and the puzzle not only fell apart, but revealed an eloquently adequate unified field theory rich in practical results. And like a good Chinese puzzle, the solution was not complex, just unexpected. Instead of assuming 5 dimensions, Larson assumed 6, and properly labeled them as the 3 dimensions of space and the 3 dimensions of time. He assumed that there is a 3-dimensional coordinate time analogous to our observed 3-dimensional space. The result of this approach is that one can now calculate from the basic postulate of Larson's theory any physical value within our physical universe from the subatomic to stellar. This long sought after unified field theory is different because we are not accustomed to thinking of time as being dimensionally analogous to space. We have thought of time as one-dimensional, as a stream moving in one direction. Yet once you get the hang of it, coordinate time is mathematically a more comfortable concept with which to deal. Professor Frank Meyer of the Department of Physics at University of Wisconsin presently distributes a quarterly newsletter to scientists interested in Larson's new theory, which explores perplexing questions in physical theory using Larson's approach. I was interested in testing Larson's theory and made extensive calculations using his postulate. I became convinced that his theory is indeed a workable, unified field theory. If you are presently interested in checking this theory for yourself, I recommend obtaining his work and checking it as I did. I have been pondering several interesting statements communicated through contactees of the alleged UFO source prior to discovering Larson's work in the early 1960s. Although the people who had received these communications knew nothing of the problems of modern physics, they were getting information which apparently was quite central to physical theory. First, they suggested that the problem with our science was that it did not recognize enough dimensions. Second, they stated that light does not move. Light is. Larson's theory persists 6 dimensions instead of the customary 4, and finds the pure field, which Einstein believed would represent matter, to move outward from all points in space at unit velocity, or the velocity of light. Photons are created due to a vibratory displacement in space-time, the fabric of the field. Furthermore, the contactees were saying that consciousness creates vibration, this vibration being light. The vibratory displacements of space-time in Larson's theory are the first physical manifestations, which is the photon, or light. According to the UFO contees, the UFOs lower their vibrations in order to enter our skies. The entire physical universe postulated by Larson is dependent on the rate of vibration and quantized rotations of the pure field of space-time. The contactees were suggesting that time is not what we think it is. Larson suggests the same thing. The UFOs were said to move in time as we move in space. This would be entirely normal in Larson's time-space portion of the universe. Lastly, and perhaps more importantly, the contactees were receiving the message that the creation is simple, all one thing. Larson's theory is a mathematical statement of this unity. The New Science Advocates is a group of scientists and philosophers currently promoting Larson's theory. In a recent news release, they had this to say about Larson's reciprocal system of theory. No previous theory comes anywhere near being a general theory in the true sense of the term. None of them is applicable to more than a relatively small part of physical science, and none is derived entirely from premises of a general nature. Everyone finds it necessary to make many assumptions specifically applicable to its restrictive field of coverage. A theory of atomic structure makes assumptions about matter and about its basic forms. A theory of electrical phenomena makes assumptions about electricity and electric charges. A theory of quasars makes assumptions about quasars and about the radiation through which these objects make themselves known, and so on. Furthermore, all these theories make use of a host of additional assumptions of a more general character that are embodied in the basic laws and principles of physics. But now we have a theory that makes no assumptions at all, other than those contained in the fundamental postulates as to the properties of space and time which define the theory. All conclusions, including those with respect to the basic physical laws and principles, are derived solely by deduction from those postulates, without invoking the aid of any supplementary or subsidiary assumptions, and without introducing anything from experience. In our opinion, this totally unprecedented accomplishment is sufficient in itself to justify the most serious and painstaking study of the new theoretical structure. An interesting extension of Larson's work is a conjecture which I have entertained that a more informed society might index events spatially rather than temporally. When Is talks with Punarch about time, it would seem that they do this, for they say that a certain event was planned hundreds of light years ago. And a little bonus on this video, let's talk about the metal bending children. When Uri Geller performs on TV, mentally bending metal and fixing clocks, there are often many kids who try to duplicate Uri's tricks. Sometimes the kids succeed. The number of children that can cause bend and breaks in metal and other materials just by wanting the break or bend to occur is increasing daily. John Taylor, professor of mathematics at King's College, reports in his excellent book, Superminds, on the extensive tests run in England on several of these gifted children. What physicists have never before considered worth investigating is now increasing at a very rapid rate. Action at a distance, apparently as a result of some type of mental activity, seems repeatedly the observed effect. If the Gellerizing children continue to increase in number, the ability of the current children will make such fantasy TV shows as I Dream a Genie, Bewitched, Harry Potter becoming a part of reality. So far, most of the ability shown by these children is in the area of bending and breaking metals. but there is some indication that they, like Geller and Matthew Manning, will develop other abilities as well. With controlled, repeatable experiments like those conducted by Taylor and by the Stanford Research Institute in the United States, we begin to have good, solid data available for study. Gradually, we are moving into a position from which we can begin to create a science of magic. For that which has been called magic through the ages is now being performed at an ever-increasing rate, primarily by children. In the future, we may even find this magic added to the curriculum of the sciences at universities. In point of fact, the present disciplines of chemistry, physics, etc. are still basically magic to us, since we are still in the position of having no ultimate explanation of causality.